We're looking this time at session number 174. We've entitled it The Bethlehem Candle. Remember last time we saw the prophet's candle, and by this time you have probably also seen either the angel's candle or the shepherd's candle lit. That would have been on December 12 that the angel or shepherd candle would have been lit. For most will probably be the shepherd's candle. Well, this is the second candle of the Advent wreath that we've talked about. Somewhere over here I've got a picture that I have not shown you yet of a wreath. It is a wreath with three, in this case it looks like blue candles, but they typically are either blue or purple. And the pink candle, which is a shepherd's candle, and the white candle, which is Christ's candle. And so we're going to be looking at the Bethlehem candle, which is another of the purple, the second purple candle, signifying seriousness, repentance, royalty, expectation, and hope, as was the case with the prophet's candle. Well, this particular candle is also called the preparation candle by some, and the peace candle by others. Still others take the candle to signify faith or love. One of the pictures I have, I guess I could show it to you here, is one, and you'll notice it is called the love candle. So there's hope, peace, that's angels, love is the Bethlehem candle, joy is the shepherd's candle, and of course the white candle for the Christ's candle. Well, where do we stand? Well, we're going to say it represents love. The preparation, of course, they're talking about is the preparation that Mary and Joseph would have had to have made in order to make the trip with a pregnant Mary down from their hometown in Nazareth to the town in Judah known as Bethlehem, or the house of bread. Faith is a more traditional theme for some, based on God's faithfulness and his ability to keep his promises. He is, of course, omnipotent. And since he is also faithful and omnipotent, put it together, and it means he will fulfill and keep his promises. It's a faith that recognizes God's unimaginable, unconditional, unstoppable love for whom? For every one of us. It tells a story of a humble couple on an untimely and unplanned journey to a tiny, insignificant town. Now, how more uninteresting can that sound? This was a story that God had prepared hundreds of years earlier through the prophets, but of course the determination was made in eternity past. God's preparation included informing those in Bethlehem through Micah that the advent of the Messiah would take place within its city limits, as in Micah 5:2. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, the insignificant town, from you one will go forth, however, for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. So the Messiah that's coming is eternal. That means this Messiah that's on his way is God himself. Now let me ask you a question. Did you notice what Micah said about who the Messiah would be? That's what I just mentioned. It's going to be a king from eternity past. And who qualified for the leading role? Only God himself, Jesus our Christ. The Advent stage had been set by God, and only the time remained unknown. He had said what it would be, the Messiah. He said where it would be, in Bethlehem. He gave notice through Micah and the words of other prophets, Isaiah in particular, but some also from Jeremiah and so forth, some from Zechariah. He set things in motion in the New Testament with Gabriel's vision to Zechariah, followed by his visit to Mary. Well, Joseph and Mary would have been in the stages of preparation for the birth of Jesus. That seems reasonable, right? A young couple has a baby on the way, you get ready for it. But God had already set the world stage through another man, a man who is not a Jew, a man nobody would have expected God to use, the Roman ruler Caesar Augustus. But first, let us take a moment to look at Gabriel's two visits. Each of Zechariah and Mary asked Gabriel a question. It would begin in Luke 1:18. And Zacharias said to the angel, "How shall I know for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." This was after Gabriel told him about the coming son, John the Baptist. And then in verse 34, Mary's question. And Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" Notice Zacharias' question. How shall I know? He was asking for a sign to affirm the truth of what Gabriel had said. Zechariah apparently had some doubt. But if you look at Mary's question, her only question was, I don't understand it. I've never been with a man. How can I become pregnant? So Zechariah receives his sign. You remember what it was? He was struck dumb, speechless, until John's birth. No such thing with Mary, because hers was not a doubting of the truth, just a wondering how it could happen. Well, as we noticed earlier and mentioned, a Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, had ordered a census for taxation purposes. We see that in Luke 2, beginning in verse 1. Now it came about in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. Why? That a census be taken of all the inhabited earth, at least that part they knew about. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all were proceeding to register for the census, everyone to his own city, meaning the city of his birth. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from Nazareth, from the city of Nazareth, as we just said, I'm a little redundant today, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register. That's why he went. He was of the family of David. He's a descendant of David, so he had to register in that hometown, Bethlehem. He went there to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him. Actually, he had taken her home as his wife. Remember, in that culture, being engaged is virtually a legal statement, just as his marriage. And was with child, Mary, that is. Augustus' decree guaranteed that Joseph would go to Bethlehem, the city of David's birth, and register just as Micah had predicted. So Mary would not have been required to go, even though she was of the lineage of David also. Why not? Well, because it was the men who were required to register. But since she was not required to go, why did she make this 80 to 90 mile trip? At least it was somewhere in the 50, 60 and beyond range. Why would she make that trip? She either had to walk or ride a donkey. And well, we're not actually told, are we? She may have been far enough along that Joseph didn't feel comfortable leaving her behind. We're also not aware of the family or the local attitudes about Mary's pregnancy. How far along was Mary? We don't really know that either. According to Luke 1:56, she stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months after her pregnancy, so she was at least 3 or 4 months along. How far she was still pregnant when they got to Bethlehem, so it was somewhere between 4 and 9 months, but we're not told specifically. We tend to speculate that it was closer to 9 months than 3, but there isn't any specific proof. But wasn't Jesus born almost upon their arrival in Bethlehem? Well, we tend to assume that, but we're not really told that either. All it says in Luke 2, verse 6, and it came about that while they were there, how long had they been there? We don't know. The days were completed for her, Mary, to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in clothes, that's swaddling clothes typically thought of, and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And since they hadn't found permanent housing in Bethlehem, that would tend to believe that she had not been there long before this happened. Verse 6 only said it was sometime after they arrived, however. From verse 7, the reference to the inn, again, tends to make us believe that it was soon after their arrival and that she would have been nearly 9 months pregnant at that time. But here's another interesting thought. Might Mary have realized that her son had to be born in Bethlehem because of the prophecy in Micah 5:2? Again, she likely knew, but we don't have any way of knowing with certainty. You will find that there are many things we do not know, many details we do not know about the incarnation. But regardless, speaking in human terms, the journey was one Mary certainly could have done without. This was just months after she'd made a similar journey to that same area of Judea to see Elizabeth. Makes one wonder, do you think she went through Bethlehem when she went to see Elizabeth? Could have been. But Mary most likely had a lot of things on her mind, right? Why? Well, what would you think? Where would they stay? Where would they be able to afford their stay? Would Jesus, supernaturally conceived, be a normal child or some sort of hybrid? What would he be like? Who would he look like? Would he look like Joseph? Would delivery be normal or supernatural? Lots of questions that Mary could have had, although she had enough confidence to tell the Lord, go ahead, let it be as you say. So let's switch our focus now, get away from Joseph and Mary for a bit, and look at Herod the Great and the Magi. And they're introduced in Matthew chapter 2. Yeah, I know that the Magi came after Jesus' birth, and our goal has been to discuss the preparation for that birth, but in a way this fits. Why? Well, because of the distance the Magi had to travel evidently from Mesopotamia, down in the Babylonian area, many feel that their journey began well before Jesus' birth. Maybe before Mary and Joseph even knew they had to make a journey to Bethlehem. We don't know how early they got started. This belief requires several things. The Magi must have known of Jewish prophecies regarding a coming Messiah, because they said they were coming looking for the newborn king. The star that guided them must have initially appeared before Jesus was born. At least that would be reasonable if they prepared and left before Jesus was in fact born. There must have been a lengthy time of preparation, because they would have had an extensive caravan. These were not poor paupers. These were generally rich, well-to-do men who were, in a sense, kingmakers. And so they would have had a big to-do getting a caravan together. It probably would have included a military convoy also. But why did they make the journey? You ever ask yourself, why did the Magi follow that star? We know that they said their purpose was to worship this newborn Messiah. We see that in the first 2 verses of chapter 2 of Matthew. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. So they did not arrive until after Jesus was born, but we don't know when they started. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews, they said. For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Their question seems to affirm that they knew at least some of the Jewish prophecies. Can you think of any prophecy in the Old Testament that included a star and a king? Well, if you don't, and you're curious, go to Numbers 24:17. We'll not go there right now. It's a whole nother interesting rabbit trail if you want to get onto that one. If you remember, the Jewish religious scholars knew exactly where the Messiah was to be born, because they knew it from Micah. But Matthew tells us that in verses 4 through 6 of chapter 2. And gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he, that's Herod, began to inquire of them where the Christ was to be born. And they said to him, this is the religious scholars of that day, in Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, and they quoted Micah, 5:2, I believe it was. But interesting here too, the Magi were following a star based on some prophecy and their faith that this would happen. But the Jewish scholars, there's no evidence that any of them went with the Magi, even though they knew it was supposed to be in Bethlehem. Well, the Magi found out that it was to be in Bethlehem, and of course they were to go there. Herod, of course, was known as the king of the Jews. But Herod wasn't truly a Jewish king. 2 reasons. One, he was not a descendant of David. He was appointed by the Romans, and it took him a certain amount of conniving and payoffs in order to get there. As a matter of fact, Herod the Great was not even a Jew. He was an Idumean, probably a descendant of Esau somewhere along the way. He was a violent man, executing several close family members who defied him or challenged him for power. But let's go back to the Magi. When they arrived, Scripture says Herod was troubled. That's in verse 3 of Matthew 2. And when Herod the king heard it, he was troubled and not only him, all Jerusalem with him. Why was he troubled? Well, Herod knew he didn't have a newborn son who would be the king by inheritance. So any other child born king of the Jews would be a competitor for Herod's crown, and he couldn't go such competition. He had to know, where is this character? But why was all Jerusalem in an uproar? Well, maybe because of what they saw in the caravan, especially if it had a military attachment. Word buzzing around about Herod talking with the Magi. Who knows? But evidently the whole place was in an uproar of some kind with the arrival of the Magi. Who were these mysterious wise men? We don't know much about them, but Magi were known to have existed at least 600 years before Christ. They were first known as a hereditary priesthood among the Medes. You remember the Medes and the Persians who conquered Babylon. They were found in Media, Babylonia, Persian, Parthia, the region that, as we've said before, is called Mesopotamia. Their religion fluctuated. It was predominantly pagan, even occultic. They were generally wealthy, influential men within the government, kingmakers. They were interpreters of dreams. They had all that going for them. But they had lost, by the time of Jesus, they had lost a lot of power except in Persia, or modern day Iran. They were were they from Persia? Possibly, we aren't told, and evidently no one's really been able to verify whether they were or not. But let's back up again. They were said to be in the courts of several personalities of Scripture: Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, Cyrus, Xerxes. You can find that in Jeremiah 39 and in Daniel 2 through 5. It is known that over the years some Magi were Jews. In fact, Daniel is said to have been the leader of the Magi in Babylon. In Daniel 5:11, the king's mother, this is in Persia, remember, king's mother speaking says, or in Babylon anyhow, there is a man in your kingdom of whom is the spirit of the holy gods is on him. I blew that. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And she's talking about Daniel. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. And these were the Magi. So this was Nebuchadnezzar's son, the guy of the handwriting on the wall fame. So we know the rest of the Magi story. They found Jesus, they worshipped him as they had come to do. They lavished very valuable gifts on Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. Then they left, avoiding another incident with Herod. They were told to go a different way, not to go back to Jerusalem. They claimed to be looking for the newborn Messiah so they could worship him. Herod told the Magi he wanted to worship Jesus too. What do you think? Do you think sight of Jesus may have changed Herod's mind and his character? Keep in mind that all things are possible with God, but also keep in mind that Herod was part of God's plan all along, and he was an extremely evil, unsettled man. So just as God used Augustus to accomplish his will, he had used kings before, if you remember. Remember, it says that all earthly rulers are subject to his will. Cyrus was one, for example, and subject to his will in one way or the other. They will do God's bidding as well as the ordinary man. Well, just as Mary may have seen the trip to Bethlehem as an interruption to her preparation plans, interruption to our plans may also be God's way of moving us to a ministry of his choosing. He moved Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem to meet his plan. There's no reason to suspect that if you're a believer, God will not do the same thing for you. So if there are interruptions, critical points in your life, they may be God's way of getting your attention and telling you, hey, I've got a task for you. God's interruptions are generally crises of faith. When you're faced with one, will you drop your personal plans and respond as Mary did, completely to God's leading, say, whatever you want, Lord, it's okay? Or will we not? Will we follow God's choosing, or will we not? The choice is ours, you know. Look at 1 Corinthians 2, verses 6 through 8. Yet do we speak wisdom among those who are mature, a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away, but we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory, the wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. And by the way, the Lord of glory, there is a psalm, Psalm 24. If you want to know about the King of glory and its import, go to Psalm 24 and read it. Well, we got a couple minutes to do some takeaways. God, through the prophets, had prepared for the Messiah's advent hundreds of years before the event, up through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Zechariah. Judaism's elite, think back just a couple minutes ago, Judaism's elite knew the facts, but they did not evidently understand the signs and the times. Remember, they didn't follow to Bethlehem as far as we know. Foreigners read the signs or read the signs and understood the times. The Magi knew it was time. Our hope as believers is based entirely on God's love and his faithfulness, along with his ability to keep his promises. God promises, God delivers, we receive, we are blessed. Well, next session, we're going to look at the angel's candle. Now, that's going to break tradition a bit. Normally, it is the shepherd's candle that is candle number 3, the candle of joy, which places it exactly in the middle of the 5 candles. We've looked at 2 purple candles, prophets and Bethlehem. We will look at the 3rd purple candle, the angel's candle. Next time, we will treat the shepherd's candle as candle number 4. We're not finished yet. We have a long way to go. And remember this one thing. It's Christmas. The baby Jesus is here. But Easter is coming.